Good evening, night owls, and welcome to Whisper Crowley. It was a question that didn't have an answer. I didn't even need to ask it. But I did anyway. I whispered to the shadows, as though they might answer. Am I alone? There was no reply, of course. But something answered me all the same. I sat there on the edge of my bed, listening to the silence. A thick, suffocating silence that seemed to settle deeper with each passing second. The wind outside had died down, leaving nothing but the unsettling quiet that now filled the room. It was the kind of silence that made you feel as though the world outside had vanished, and you were the only one left. Alone. I could feel it. I could feel the space around me pressing in, closing off. But there was something more than just a silence. Something darker. A presence that slipped in and out of my mind, fleeting and fast, like a shadow at the edge of my vision. I tried to shake it off. Told myself it was nothing. But it was always there. Every corner of my room felt wrong. Every time I looked at the windows, I saw movement in the darkness. Every time I turned my head, there was a flicker, just a flicker of something that didn't belong. At first, I thought it was just my imagination. I had been under a lot of stress lately. The long hours at work, the tension with friends, everything seemed to be falling apart. But this was something else. A sound. A quiet scrape against the floor. So faint I almost missed it. But it was there, clear as day. I froze, listening. There it was again. Closer this time. It wasn't the wind. The air was still. The trees outside were silent. It was something else. Something moving, something that shouldn't be moving. My heart began to race. I stood up slowly, eyes darting around the room. My breath hitched in my throat. Nothing had changed, but the weight of the air had shifted. I could feel it now, the tension. Something watching me. The sound came again, louder. And this time I was sure of it. It was footsteps. Slow, deliberate steps. They echoed across the floorboards, the sound reverberating through the stillness of the house. I could almost hear the soft scrape of nails against the wood. I took a step back. My pulse pounded in my ears. There was no way it could be real. The rational part of me tried to hold on to reason. It was nothing. Just the house settling, the wind playing tricks on my mind. But I knew better. I knew there was something in the room with me. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it like a presence that was too close, too intimate. A shadow darted across the wall. I whipped my head toward it. Nothing. Just the dim glow of the street lamp outside filtering through the curtains. But the feeling didn't fade. It was only getting worse. It was as if the darkness itself was alive, crawling, shifting around me. Every inch of the room felt thicker. The air heavier. I could taste it, something metallic on the back of my tongue, like blood. A low growl echoed in the room. Not from outside. Not from the street. It came from inside my very own mind. I turned to the door, a fleeting thought that maybe I was just losing it. Maybe I was imagining the sound. But then I heard it again. The growl. Closer this time. It was almost a whisper, but it sent a chill straight down my spine. It was behind me. I spun around. Nothing. But the room was colder now. The walls seemed to press in closer, and the shadows moved twisting, stretching, crawling across the floor like living things. I couldn't breathe. The panic was overwhelming, choking me. I backed away, toward the door, but the shadows seemed to follow. No escape. There was no longer any doubt in my mind. This was real. Whatever was here, it wasn't just a figment of my imagination. It was something else. Something ancient and hungry. I reached for the door handle, my fingers trembling. But just as I was about to open it, the growl came again, but this time it wasn't just a sound. It was a vibration of physical force that rattled the very foundation of the house. It wasn't the house settling anymore. It was something else. Something that wanted me. My eyes darted to the window, but I couldn't leave. There was nowhere to go. The room was closing in on me. The darkness was no longer a passive thing. It was alive. It was watching, and I could feel it getting closer. I don't know how long I stood there staring at the door, my heart pounding in my chest. The growl had stopped, but I didn't feel any safer. If anything, it felt more suffocating. My breath came in short gasps, each inhale sharp and shallow as I tried to steady myself. But the shadows, they weren't just in the corners anymore. They were everywhere. They had taken form. I could almost make out shapes now, just at the edge of my vision. Nothing solid, nothing real. Just dark silhouettes that seemed to shift and twitch like something unnatural. Was it real? Was it my mind? Or was the darkness alive? I swallowed hard. My hand hovered over the doorknob. I could feel it vibrating under my fingers, like the door itself was anticipating something. A breath, a presence too close. I almost pulled my hand away, but then I heard it again. A shuffle. Footsteps, soft and slow, coming from the corner of the room, just beneath the window. My eyes darted over to the spot, where the darkness seemed to deepen. The room felt heavier now, like the weight of 1,000 eyes was pressing down on me, suffocating me. The air tasted stale, like something had died in here long ago. I could feel my legs trembling. My body screamed for escape, but there was nowhere to go. I was trapped in this suffocating silence, with the shadows closing in. The growl returned, this time louder, more insistent, almost like a warning. I spun around, scanning the room. But there was nothing to see, nothing I could touch. The only thing real was the dread gnawing at the edges of my mind. It is just in your head, I told myself. It is just in your head. But then a whisper. It was so faint, I almost thought I imagined it. But it was there. A voice, low and guttural, barely above a murmur. Vaughn. I froze. My blood turned to ice. It wasn't he, my voice. It wasn't he anyone I knew. It wasn't he even human. The whisper came again, louder this time. Vaughn. My body moved before I could think. I ripped the door open and bolted into the hallway, my feet pounding against the wooden floors as I raced toward the stairs. The air in the hallway felt wrong. It felt cold, and yet the house was warm. It shouldn't have been cold. It wasn't normal. I reached the stairs, but as I stepped onto the first step, the floor beneath me creaked. And then there was a sound of footsteps behind me, but this time, closer. Too close. I could feel the presence like hot breath on the back of my neck. It sent a jolt of fear through my body. I dared not turn around. I ran faster. The stairs creaked under my weight, but I didn't care. My only thought was to get away. Get out of this house. But then something else happened. The lights flickered. Once. Twice. And then they went out completely. The darkness in the house seemed to thicken in an instant, like a living thing, swallowing everything. I stumbled, my hands reaching out for the railing, my heart hammering against my chest as I tried to find my footing. And then the whisper came again. Only this time, it wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a low, guttural growl so close it felt like it was inside my ears, vibrating against my skull. You can escape. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. The growl was followed by a rustling sound, like something dragging itself across the floor. Something moving, something far too large to be human. I could feel the weight of it, the pressure in the air like it was closing in on me. And that's when I heard it. A scraping sound. Claws. Sharp claws scraping against wood. I could hear it growing louder, closer. I felt it, like a tremor in the floor, vibrating beneath my feet. Whatever was in the house was moving closer, hunting me. I sprinted up the stairs, my legs aching, my breath ragged. The darkness was almost suffocating now, pressing in from every angle. It was no longer just the shadows. It was everywhere. I reached the top of the stairs and dashed toward the hallway, searching for something, anything that could protect me. But there was nothing. The doors were all shut tight, the windows locked. I slammed my fist against the door of the guest room, frantic, desperate. It didn't open. I twisted the knob again and again, but it wouldn't budge. No, 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 I thought, my mind spiraling out of control. I turned back. The the growl now vibrating through my chest, so close I could feel its hot breath on my skin. Then I saw it. The shadow. It was not just a shape anymore. It was the figure. Tall. Thin. Unnaturally long limbs that bent at impossible angles. Its head was too large for its body, and its eyes glowed faintly, like a pair of white-hot embers. It didn't move like anything human. It moved like it was gliding, like it wasn't even touching the ground. And then it spoke. But not with words. A deep, bone-rattling growl echoed in the air, and I felt my body freeze. My eyes locked on the creature, paralyzed by terror. One. I heard the whisper again. But this time, it wasn't from inside my head. It was from it. I didn't need to be told twice. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the creature, my heart thudding in my chest like a drum. The thing in front of me was no longer a shadow, it was something more. Something alive, something that should not exist. Its body twisted unnaturally as it glided closer, its limbs jerking in strange, inhuman motions. Its eyes glowed with a cold, eerie light like they were trying to burn their way into my mind. On. The whisper was a command now, a promise. It wasn't a question. I had no choice. My feet moved on their own, my body breaking free from the grip of terror. I tore myself away from the creature, feeling its eyes on my back like a physical weight. I didn't look behind me as I sprinted down the hallway, but I could hear it. The scrape of claws on wood. The dragging sound. The soft, unnatural breathing. It was closer now. Much closer. It was chasing me. I had to find a way out. I reached the stairs, the wooden steps creaking beneath my weight as I ran down them two at a time, the panic surging through my veins, turning my thoughts into static. My hand scrambled for the railing, my breath coming in short, desperate gasps. I was almost to the door. Almost. But something was wrong. The door of my only escape wasn't where it should have been. It had shifted. The walls of the hallway seemed to have closed in, the space warping before my eyes. I stumbled to a halt, my pulse racing. The door I was reaching for was now on the opposite side of the hallway, as if it had moved while I wasn't looking. My mind screamed in confusion, trying to process what was happening, but it felt like I was sinking deeper into a nightmare. No, no, no! I turned around, my body shaking with fear. The creature was still coming. I could hear its breath now, heavy and strained, like it was savoring my fear, drawing nearer with every second. My legs felt likely, but I forced myself to move to run. The house, it wasn't just a house anymore. The walls seemed to breathe. The floor shifted beneath my feet. I could feel the air growing colder, a strange, biting chill that wasn't from the wind. It felt alive. I ran back the way I had come, not even thinking, just following instinct. The sounds of my footfalls echoed around me, each step a beat in the frantic rhythm of my heart. The darkness seemed to be growing thicker now, consuming everything, until even the faintest hint of light from the windows was gone. The night outside was nothing but an impenetrable black void. And then the whisper again. One. I didn't need to hear it again. The command had been planted deep in my brain, carved into my very being. I turned down another hallway, but the walls here were different too. The windows, the doors, they were all wrong. The house had shifted again. The floor creaked under my feet. The old were groaning like it was alive. I had no idea where I was anymore. I didn't even know if I was still in the same house. It was as if everything had changed, like I was caught in a nightmare where the rules no longer made sense. The growl came again, and this time it was too close. I froze, my blood turning to ice as I heard the distinct sound of claws scraping across the floor behind me. The growl was joined by a second, lower growl, deeper, more guttural. It was coming from different directions now, surrounding me. I could feel it, the presence, the suffocating weight of it. I whipped my head around, searching for any sign of escape. But there was nothing. Nothing except the oppressive dark. The house, it had become a maze, a trap I couldn't escape. The shadows were alive, and they were closing in. Suddenly a loud crash echoed through the hallway behind me. A door slamming open. I spun around, half expecting to see the creature, but it wasn't the beast I saw. It was something else. Something more human but twisted. A man. or what used to be a man. He was standing in the doorway, his body bent at an unnatural angle. His clothes were torn, and his face was contorted in a twisted grimace. His eyes, those empty, hollow eyes, glowed faintly in the darkness. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice rasping, almost like a whisper. I could feel the air go still. The shadows seemed to gather around him, swirling like a living thing. This thing wasn't real. He couldn't be. But somehow I knew he was. "You can escape," he repeated, his voice growing stronger, more forceful, as if he were trying to break through my mind. I backed away, my heart hammering against my ribs, every instinct screaming for me to run. But where? Where could I go? Every direction felt like it was leading me deeper into the nightmare. The girl from behind me grew louder. The creature was close. "Run," the man whispered one last time, his grin stretching impossibly wide. And then I heard it. The creature. Its claws scraping the floor again. Closer. So much closer. I couldn't think. My feet were moving before my brain could catch up, darting down another hallway, my breath ragged, my heart racing. I had no plan. I had no hope. All I had was the primal fear that screamed at me to survive. But as I ran, I couldn't shake the feeling that the house itself was alive, that it was controlling my every move, pulling me deeper into its dark, suffocating embrace. And I could hear it just behind me. The whisper. "One." But I didn't know if I could. I ran. I didn't know where or why, but my legs carried me forward, and the walls seemed to close in tighter with each step. The house, that forsaken thing, was alive. I could feel it watching me, shifting around me like a labyrinth, twisting the familiar halls into an endless maze of suffocating dark. I don't know how long I ran. Time had become meaningless in this nightmare. The air grew colder, the shadows more oppressive, pressing in from every corner, making it harder to breathe. My heartbeat was a drum in my ears, drowning out all other sounds except the relentless growl behind me. It was always there, closer, always closer. A sound broke through the chaos, a sickening crack that rang through the silence. My head snapped around, my pulse spiking. I had to keep moving, but I couldn't help it. I had to see. In the hallway behind me, just at the corner of my vision, I saw it. A figure. It was tall, unnaturally tall. Its limbs stretched beyond human proportions, its skin gray and slick, almost wet under the dim light of the house. Its eyes, those eyes black like pits that seemed to absorb all the light around them. And its mouth, I couldn't focus on it. Not until it opened, that is. The scream that followed wasn't a scream at all. It was a roar, gurgling growl, deep and animalistic. The sound reverberated in my chest, making it impossible to think, to breathe. I could feel the force of the scream trying to tear through me, clawing at my soul, threatening to break me apart from the inside. I couldn't look anymore. I turned and bolted down the hallway again, each footfall echoing like thunder. The wall seemed to shift again. They were too close now. The space was too tight. The house wasn't just a house anymore, it was a trap, and I was its prey. The coldness in the air intensified, sharp enough to make my teeth ache. My lungs burned with each breath. I thought I was going to suffocate. I had to get out. I had to find the door, the window, anything that could let me out of this nightmare. But as I rounded the corner, I froze. The hallway stretched before me endlessly. No windows. No doors. Just dark, suffocating shadows. And that noise. That horrible noise. The scuttling. The clicking of claws on the floor. It wasn't just one creature anymore. There were others. The sound was coming from all directions. Around the corners, from the walls, from the ceiling, the floor, everywhere. I could feel them. They were surrounding me. I stumbled back, almost losing my balance, my back hitting something soft, something alive, and I spun around, heart hammering in my chest. The man. The twisted man from before. He was standing in the middle of the hallway, his mouth stretched into a grotesque grin, as if he had been waiting for me. His eyes, those black, empty eyes. "You can't escape," he rasped, his voice barely a whisper. "The darkness has claimed you now." I couldn't speak. My throat felt tight, as if the very air had been sucked out of me. My legs were shaking, threatening to give way beneath me. But I couldn't stop running. I couldn't let it consume me. I darted past him, my eyes flicking from side to side, looking for any possible way out. But all I saw were walls. The house had closed in. I was trapped. There was no way out anymore. The growl grew louder, closer. I could feel it now, vibrating through the floor, through the air. Something was coming for me. I didn't know where I was going. I had no plan. No hope. But I couldn't stop. I had to keep moving. As I sprinted forward, a low sound whispered through the darkness. It wasn't the growl of the creature. It wasn't the man's voice. It was something else, something more distant. A voice, but not human. Come closer. It wasn't a command. It was an invitation, and it made my blood run cold. The shadows around me shifted again. They began to move, to grow longer, to twist. They were alive, and they were hungry. Come closer. The voice, now clearer, was in my head. It was inside me, pulling at something deep in my chest. A force that was both foreign and familiar. Something that had been waiting. Something that had been watching me for longer than I realized. I stopped. My body stopped on its own, like it was being controlled by the unseen hand of the house. My breath caught in my throat, my eyes wide as I stared at the shifting shadows. They were moving, like liquid darkness, curling and stretching toward me, reaching for me. I could hear the clicking of claws again, growing louder. The growl. But this time, it wasn't coming from behind me. It was coming from within the darkness. I couldn't move. My legs were locked in place. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. The shadows were closing in on me now. I could feel them brushing against my skin, cold and slick. Come closer. The voice was louder now. Insistent. Like it was beckoning me to come toward the thing that lay in the heart of the darkness. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I knew what it was. It wasn't just a creature. It was the house itself. And it wanted me. I felt the weight of its gaze, the pressure of its unseen presence. I could feel its hunger. It had been waiting for me all along. I was its prey. Bon. I didn't know if it was the house telling me to run, or if it was my own instinct screaming for me to survive. But I didn't care anymore. My feet moved and I ran. I had no plan, no destination. I just ran. I ran until the walls closed in again, until the darkness swallowed me whole. And still, I could hear the whispers. Come closer. I couldn't tell how long I'd been running. The house had swallowed all sense of time. It felt like hours, or maybe just minutes, since I had felt the cold shadows closing around me. My legs were on fire, but I couldn't stop. I had to keep moving. The dark seemed to stretch in every direction, a labyrinth of corridors that twisted like the inside of a nightmare. My breath was ragged, my body shaking from exhaustion, but my mind was clearer than ever. The house, the shadows, the creatures, they were all connected. It wasn't just a place. It was a living thing. It had been waiting for me. And now it was playing with me. I felt the darkness tightening around me, creeping along my skin like 1,000 invisible fingers. I could hear their whispers again. Faint, but there. They were coming from all around me, echoing in my head, in my chest, in my very soul. Come closer. The voice, insistent and cold, reverberated in my skull. It was no longer a question. It was a command. My body wanted to obey, to step forward, to give in, but I fought it with every ounce of strength I had left. I couldn't let it consume me. I stumbled into another room, one I didn't recognize. It was small, almost claustrophobic, with no windows, just the dull flicker of an old, dying lamp hanging from the ceiling. The shadows in the corners seemed to pulse with life, shifting like something was moving just out of sight. I was trapped again. I turned in circles, trying to find a way out, but the walls felt alive. They were shifting, breathing. Each breath of the house made the walls expand, contract, like it was inhaling and exhaling, as if it was watching me, waiting for me to make my next move. I ran to the door, yanked it open, and stumbled into the hallway once more. The growl was louder now, closer. It was all around me. It was coming from inside the walls, from beneath the floorboards. I could hear it crawling, scraping, scratching. I had to get out. I had to survive. I sprinted down the hall, my heart hammering in my chest, my mind screaming for a way out, but it was hopeless. The house was alive. The walls, the floor, the ceiling, they were all part of it. It was the beast. It was the darkness itself, wrapping itself tighter around me. I reached another hallway, but this one was different. It didn't end. It just stretched on forever, an endless corridor of shadow, darker than the rest. The air grew colder here, so cold that I could see my breath swirling in front of me like mist. Come closer. The voice was everywhere. In the walls. In the floor. In my head. It was urging me forward, pulling at me with invisible threads, urging me to step deeper into the abyss. I didn't want to. I couldn't. But my feet were already moving. They were betraying me. It was like something inside me had given in. My mind was screaming for me to stop, but my body, controlled by something darker, something older, was pushing forward. I walked down the hall, and the growl grew louder, more distinct. The sound wasn't just a noise anymore. It was something physical, something that scraped against my bones. And then I saw it. At the end of the hallway, in the darkness, I saw a movement. It wasn't just a shadow anymore. It was a form. A shape. Tall, hunched, moving unnaturally. Its skin was pale, stretched thin over bones that seemed too sharp, too angular, like the thing was starving. I couldn't move. My legs felt like stone, as if they were frozen in place by the sheer presence of the thing. Its head snapped toward me, and its eyes, those black eyes, they were hollow, empty, and they were staring right at me. A sickening chill ran through me, ice cold and sharp. I felt my heart stop in my chest, my breath caught in my throat. The growl was deafening now, vibrating in my skull. The creature, it was getting closer. Its mouth opened. No, not a mouth. A cavern. A gaping hole of darkness that swallowed all the light around it, a jagged, toothless abyss that seemed to stretch forever. Come closer. I was no longer in control of my body. I couldn't fight it anymore. The house the beast had won. I took a step forward, then another and another. I was moving toward it, toward the thing that wanted to consume me, to swallow me whole. The shadows around me began to move, writhing like snakes. They twisted and coiled, pulling me closer, wrapping around my legs, my arms, until I was bound by them. The walls seemed to close in, the ceiling lowering, the floor shifting beneath me. The very house itself was shrinking, pressing in, forcing me toward that abyss. The creature took a step forward, and I felt it. The cold. The hunger. It was alive, and it wanted me. Come closer. The whispers were louder now, echoing inside my mind. I couldn't escape. I couldn't move. The darkness had me, and as I stepped closer to the gaping hole of the creature, I realized what I had known all along. This wasn't just a house. It was a trap. A trap that had been waiting for me, and I had walked right into it. I hope you enjoyed the first story. If you did, don't forget to leave a like. But if I didn't do my job well, feel free to give it a thumbs down. Either way, drop a comment and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, let us continue. The ruins of the old palace stood like a silent sentinel in the fading light of day, its crumbling stones weathered by time and secrets. I stood before the gate, the iron bars rusted and twisted, as if the very structure of this place had been contorted by some force beyond nature. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and moss, a smell that seemed to seep into your lungs and stay there, uninvited. It was a place forgotten by most, yet something about it gnawed at me, pulling me closer, urging me to explore the shadows that hung heavy between its walls. I hadn't come here for adventure, not at first. I had come to escape from the chaos of my own life, my own mind. The city had become too loud, too filled with voices I no longer wanted to hear. This place, this ruin, felt like the perfect refuge. But the moment I stepped through the broken archway and onto the grounds, something shifted. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the creak of the trees bending in the breeze. It was a feeling that I couldn't place, a tightening in my chest, a sense that I was being watched, though I saw no one. I brushed it off as my own nerves. After all, this place was abandoned. Or so I thought. I wandered through the courtyard, the sound of my footsteps muffled by the thick blanket of ivy and dirt that covered the once grand stone paths. The remnants of the palace were like fragments of a forgotten dream, arches without doors, windows that stared out onto nothing, and towers that seemed to twist unnaturally in the light of the setting sun. Then I saw it. A trail. Barely noticeable at first, hidden beneath the overgrowth of the garden, but undeniable. Slender, jagged marks in the earth, like something had been dragged through the soil. My first instinct was to ignore it, to turn back, but curiosity, an old companion of mine, pushed me forward. I knelt down, brushing away the leaves to get a clearer look. The marks weren't just random slashes, they were deliberate, as though something or someone had carefully left them behind. The shapes they formed were strange, almost unnatural, like the fingers of some large creature had scraped the ground in a slow, painful drag. I should have turned around then. I should have. But I didn't. Instead, I followed the trail, my heart racing as I walked deeper into the labyrinth of the ruins. The further I went, the more the air seemed to change. The shadows grew thicker, darker, as if they were drawing closer, moving with me. The sounds of the world outside the wind, the birds, began to fade, until the only sound was my own breath, heavy and quick in the silence. I reached the edge of what remained of the garden, where the trail led into the base of a crumbling tower. The walls here were covered in thick vines, and the stones beneath my feet were slick with moisture. But it wasn't the towel that caught my attention, it was what lay before it. Another set of marks, these deeper, more pronounced. I followed them up the stairs, my hand brushing the cold stone as I ascended. The air here felt thicker, heavier, pressing in on me. I paused for a moment at the top, my eyes scanning the interior of the tower. It was mostly empty, save for the scattered remains of old furniture and the hollow echoes of time itself. But then I saw it. A door. Hidden in the far corner, nearly indistinguishable from the surrounding stone. Its edges were worn, as if it hadn't been opened in centuries. But it was unmistakably there, beckoning me forward. I knew I should have left. I knew the whispers in the back of my mind were warning me. That the trail, the marks, they were leading me here. I reached for the handle. And then I heard it. A sound, faint at first, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. A soft scrape, like the sound of something or someone moving just beyond my reach. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze, my hand still on the door. Was I truly alone? The question clung to me, and for the first time since stepping into the ruins, a chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the cold of the evening air. I pulled the door open with a creak that sounded too loud in the stillness. Beyond it, a narrow staircase descended into darkness, and as I stepped inside, I felt it. The air grew colder, as if the very walls themselves were alive, breathing in the shadows and exhaling something darker, something older than time itself. I took the first step down, my foot scraping against the cold stone. The trail of marks led into this dark passageway, and as I descended, I could feel the weight of the past pressing in on me, the forgotten tragedies that lingered in the air like smoke. Something was waiting for me down there. I couldn't see it yet, but I could feel it. The deeper I went, the more the walls seemed to close in, the more I began to hear whispers, soft at first, but growing louder. Who was there? The question was not my own, but it echoed in my mind like a call from a far-off place. A place I had no desire to reach. But I had already begun this descent. There was no turning back now. And then I heard the first distinct sound. Footsteps. Not mine. I stopped, my heart hammering. I strained my ears to listen, but the sound was gone. Just a faint echo of something that should not have been there. But the trail continued. I could feel my pulse quicken, my breath shallow as I stood at the foot of the staircase, staring into the oppressive darkness. The air was thick now, as though the shadows themselves were trying to suffocate the life out of the space. The footsteps had stopped, but the echo of them lingered, vibrating in my skull. I strained my ears, listening, but the only thing that filled the air was a heavy, suffocating silence, like the world itself was holding its breath. I told myself it was nothing. A trick of the mind. But my hand shook as I placed one foot on the cold stone, the surface slick with dampness. I had to move. The marks, the trail, they were all leading me here. I couldn't turn back now. Something had already stirred in me. I need to uncover whatever had been left behind to understand what had once happened in this forsaken place. I descended slowly, each step bringing a deeper chill, the coldness of the stone seeping through my shoes and into my bones. The smell of mildew and decay was overwhelming now, as if the very walls were rotting. I kept my hand pressed against the wall, trying to steady myself, but it didn't help. The darkness was closing in on me, the silence growing heavier with each passing moment. I could no longer tell if the whispers were real or just a figment of my own fear. Another step. The moment my foot touched the next step, the whispers intensified, sharp and guttural now. They were no longer just distant sounds, but words. Faint, incoherent, yet filled with a terrible urgency. Leave, get out, don't go further. I jerked back, my breath catching in my throat. The air felt electric, as if charged with an unnatural energy. I glanced back up the staircase, my mind screaming for me to turn and flee. But the door at the top, the one I had entered through, was already gone. No, wait. It wasn't gone. It was still there, but it looked different. The doorway had shifted, its edges now blurred and unnatural, as if the walls themselves were slowly closing in. I reached out a trembling hand to touch the air in front of the door, but it was gone, replaced by the same thick, damp stone that surrounded me. I am trapped. I pressed my back against the wall, trying to steady my breathing, but it was impossible. I couldn't think. My mind felt foggy, as if something was pressing down on it, trying to smother any rational thought. I needed to focus. I needed to push through. The whispers were now undeniable, rising and falling like a chorus of tortured voices. You shouldn't be here. Leave. It is too late. Too late for you. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to center myself. I needed to keep moving. I had to find out what this place was, what it was hiding. And then I would leave. But not yet. Not yet. I stepped forward once more, my legs heavy, unwilling. The air grew colder still, and the scent of rot was more pungent with each breath I took. My hands were clammy, but I kept moving, following the trail that led deeper into the labyrinth. The walls here were lined with crude, faded carvings, symbols that seemed both ancient and alien, as if they had been etched into the stone by hands long gone. I couldn't decipher them, but they made me uneasy. They spoke of things I wasn't sure I wanted to understand. The trail continued down the corridor, winding like a serpent through the ruins. With each turn, the air became thicker, suffocating. My thoughts became muddled, disconnected, like I was drifting through a fog that was eating away at my sanity. And then, just as I reached the next bend, I saw it. A shadow in the far corner of the room, faint at first, but unmistakable. Someone was standing there, barely visible in the dark. It was motionless. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. My breath caught in my throat. My first instinct was to run, to flee from whatever it was, but I couldn't move. I just stood there, staring at the shape, waiting for it to move. It's not real. I tried to convince myself, but the words felt hollow, like a lie I was desperately trying to believe. I squinted, trying to make out the details, but the more I looked, the less I saw. The figure seemed to blur at the edges, as if it was a part of the darkness itself, an extension of the shadows. I couldn't tell if it was human, or something else entirely. It didn't matter. My legs trembled, my muscles refusing to obey. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, it moved. Slowly at first, just a slight shift in position, like it had been waiting for me to notice. No. The thought exploded in my mind, but it was too late. Before I could react, the figure spoke. A voice, low and guttural, as if it had not been used in centuries. You shouldn't be here. I stumbled backward, my heart hammering in my chest, but I couldn't escape. I couldn't breathe. The air seemed to thicken around me, and the walls were pressing in, squeezing the life out of me. The whisper came again, closer now, almost in my ear. Leave now. Leave before it is too late. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came. My vision blurred, my mind spiraling into a panic. And just as I thought I would lose control, the figure was gone. Vanished into the shadows as quickly as it had appeared. For a moment I stood there, paralyzed, my body stiff with terror. What the hell is this place? But the question went unanswered, lost to the depths of the labyrinth. My mind was spinning, a whirlwind of fear, confusion, and the oppressive silence that enveloped the ruins. I couldn't make sense of what had just happened. The figure it was there, and then it wasn't he, but its presence still lingered, hanging in the air like a thick fog. A sense of dread had settled in my chest, and no matter how much I tried to push it away, it wouldn't go. It was like I was being dragged into a place where reason didn't exist, where the rules of the world no longer applied. I had to get out. But where was out? The path I had followed, if it could even be called a path, was now nothing more than a twisting, endless corridor of stone and shadow. The labyrinth had a mind of its own, as if the walls themselves were shifting, subtly rearranging the world around me. I turned back the way I had come, only to find the passage I had entered through was no longer there. The doorway that had seemed so solid and clear was now just a blank expanse of stone, no hint of an opening anywhere. I pressed my palms against the cold surface, hoping to feel the familiar texture of the arch, but there was nothing. Just the same smooth rock, relentless in its silence. I entrapped. Panic surged, but I forced myself to breathe. I had to think. Think. That was all I could do. Panic wasn't going to get me out of this. I needed to find another way. I had to. I couldn't just stand there, frozen like prey. I had come here for a reason, and I wasn't going to let it end like this. The whispers had stopped, but the silence now felt worse. It was as if the entire world had ceased to exist outside this labyrinth, leaving only me in the shadows. My senses were heightened. Every tiny sound now seemed amplified. Each rustle of my clothing, the scrape of my boots on the cold stone, the flutter of my breath in the heavy air. The silence was so complete that I swore I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. I pressed on, desperate to find some exit, some clue that would lead me out of this nightmare. As I moved deeper into the labyrinth, the air grew heavier, denser. It felt like I was wading through something thick, as if the space itself was fighting against me, pushing me back with invisible hands. The walls, once so smooth and consistent, now had a roughness to them. Cracks ran through the stone-like veins, and the faintest glow seemed to pulse from within the crevices. A dull, sickly light, like the last remnants of the dying star, barely illuminated the path ahead. But even in that dim light, I could see the shapes, things moving just out of the corner of my eye. At first, it was nothing, just the flicker of movement. But as I took another step forward, I realized they weren't just shadows. No, they were something else, something alive. I froze, my hand still pressed to the wall. The shadows didn't stay still. They crawled, slithered, like living things, forming shapes that I could never quite catch. They darted from one corner to another, always just out of sight when I tried to focus on them. My stomach churned, a sick realization sinking in. There is something else here, and I wasn't here alone. I tried to call out, to say something, anything, but my voice was swallowed by the labyrinth. The sound of my own breath was all I could hear, ragged and unsteady. I started walking again, my eyes darting around, constantly scanning the walls, the floor, the shadows. I couldn't keep still, not now. A distant sound caught my attention. It was faint but unmistakable. A faint scraping noise, followed by a soft tapping. Thump, thump, thump. The sound was coming from deeper in the labyrinth. I had to follow it. I had no choice. I moved toward it, cautiously at first, every step heavier than the last. Each breath felt like it would be my last, as if the air itself was thinning. The closer I got to the source of the noise, the more intense the feeling of being watched grew. Every part of me screamed to turn around, to run, but I pushed forward. I was too far in now. There was no going back. As I rounded the next corner, I saw it. A door. Small, unassuming, carved into the stone like a forgotten relic. The noise was louder now, unmistakable. Thump, thump, thump. I reached for the door, but my fingers barely grazed the wood before the door creaked open on its own. A rush of cold air hit me, like stepping into a freezer. It carried with it the faintest scent of decay, rotting wood, old earth, and something else. Something metallic. Something familiar. I stepped inside, heart pounding, only to find that there was no room behind the door. No walls, no floor, nothing but an empty void. It was as if the door had led me to nowhere, to a place outside of time. And in that void, I saw something. A shape. A silhouette. It is her. I didn't need to see her face to know who it was. The figure, standing motionless in the middle of the emptiness, was too familiar. The same face, the same haunting eyes that had appeared to me in the reflections of the mirrors. The same figure I had seen in the shadowy corridors of this cursed place. What do you want from me? I screamed inside my head, but the words never left my lips. The figure didn't move. You should have never come here. Her voice echoed in my mind, low and mournful, like the whisper of a wind through a cracked window. And then, just like before, the figure was gone. The room was empty again, but it wasn't silent. In the darkness, I heard something. A faint scratching, like nails against stone, followed by the faintest whisper. You were not leaving. Not now. The door slammed shut behind me so abruptly that I flinched. A sharp, resonating sound that seemed to echo in my skull. I spun around, but the door, if it could even be called a door, was gone. The smooth stone wall I had passed through moments ago had returned, sealing off the entrance to whatever that void had been. My heart raced in my chest as if it were trying to escape. My hands, clammy with sweat, pressed against the stone, searching for some hidden latch or handle, anything that could open the wall again. But there was nothing. Just the cold, unyielding rock. That's when I heard it. The whisper. It was faint at first, like a breath on the edge of my consciousness. But then it grew louder, more distinct. You're not leaving, not now. My breath caught in my throat. The voice was the same, familiar, yet completely alien. It chilled me to the bone, curling its tendrils around my thoughts. I closed my eyes trying to block it out, but the whisper only seemed to grow stronger, closer. I pressed my palms to my ears, but the sound was inside my head now. I stumbled backward, tripping over the uneven stone floor. My foot caught on something, a jagged piece of rock, and I fell hard, scraping my palms on the rough surface. The pain was sharp, but it didn't matter. I was already on my feet again, the scrape barely registering. Get out. The thought came to me like a command. A primal, gut-wrenching urge to escape this place. I wasn't supposed to be here. I didn't belong in this labyrinth, this tomb of forgotten memories and ancient horrors. But how could I leave when the labyrinth itself was shifting around me? The wall seemed to be closing in. The floor beneath me felt unstable, as if it might give way at any moment. The whispers were growing louder, now forming words. You should have listened. I turned and ran, my breath ragged in my chest. The labyrinth was no longer a place I could navigate. It was a living thing, something that fed on fear and confusion. The passageways twisted and stretched before me, endlessly, without rhyme or reason. No matter how much I ran, every turn I took seemed to lead to the same dead end, the same endless loop. I didn't even know which direction I was heading anymore. The walls and floor blurred together in a maddening haze of stone and shadow. The world had become a distorted maze of horror, each step forward sinking me deeper into this nightmare. I passed an archway, and then another. They seemed to appear out of nowhere, as if the labyrinth were mocking me. I had to keep moving. But the ground was uneven, and my legs felt like lead dragging me down with every step. The walls felt closer, tighter, the air growing heavier with every breath. Then, in the distance, I saw something. A flicker of light. At first, I thought it was an illusion, a mirage conjured by my terrified mind. But it wasn't. It was real. A small dim light glowing faintly from around the next corner. I didn't hesitate. I ran toward it, pushing myself harder, faster, as if the very light itself could save me. The whispering voices were gone for now, replaced by a heavy silence that seemed to press against my eardrums. The only sound was the pounding of my heart in my chest, each beat a drum that kept me moving, kept me from stopping. As I rounded the corner, the light grew brighter. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make the shadows retreat. I could see more clearly now. The walls had changed. They weren't smooth and uniform anymore. They were rough, jagged, like the bones of some great beast. Cracks ran through the stone, and the air carried the unmistakable scent of damp earth and decay. The light was coming from a small alcove, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. I stepped closer, my eyes fixed on it. There, in the alcove, was something that made my blood run cold. A figure. A woman. Her face was obscured by shadows, but her presence was undeniable. Her silhouette stood perfectly still, as if waiting for me. Her clothes, if they could even be called that, were torn and faded, as though they had been worn for centuries. The scent of decay seemed to emanate from her, but there was something more. Something ancient, something alive. She didn't speak at first. She just stood there, staring at me with those dark, empty eyes. I couldn't move. My legs were rooted to the floor, my body frozen in place as her presence seemed to consume all the air around me. Then, finally, she spoke. Her voice was a whisper, barely audible, but it carried a weight that pressed down on me. You should have never come here. The words seemed to echo around me, bouncing off the walls. I opened my mouth to respond, but no sound came. I felt suffocated, like the very air in the labyrinth was thickening, pushing against my chest. I tried to move, but my body refused to obey. I could feel her eyes on me, piercing through me like she was reading my soul. I wanted to scream, to break free, but it felt as if something was holding me in place, as if the labyrinth itself had trapped me. I was going to die here. I could see it now, the truth. This place wasn't just a labyrinth. It was a prison. A tomb. And I had wandered into its depths, lured by curiosity, by something I couldn't explain. Now I was trapped, just like all the others who had come before me. The woman took a step forward. Her movements were unnaturally slow, deliberate. Every step she took seemed to resonate with the very stone beneath her feet. And as she got closer, I felt something cold, something that gnawed at the edges of my mind. It was fear. And then, just as she reached out for me, I heard it again. The whisper. But this time, it was louder, clearer. It was everywhere. You can never leave. I closed my eyes, knowing that whatever happened next, there would be no escape. Her fingers brushed against my arm. Cold. Like ice. They sent a shock of terror through my body, as if her touch had drained all warmth from me. I gasped, struggling to break free, but my legs wouldn't move. The walls around me seemed to press in tighter, narrowing the space, closing off all exits. I can breathe. The words were stuck in my throat, and no matter how hard I tried to scream, no sound came. It was as if the labyrinth itself had swallowed my voice, leaving me alone in the suffocating silence. The woman's face loomed closer, still hidden in shadow. But her eyes, those black, empty eyes, pierced me with a knowing stare. They were not the eyes of someone who was alive. No, these were eyes that had seen centuries pass. Eyes that had witnessed the death of the world itself. She tilted her head, her gaze never leaving mine. You think you can escape, she whispered, the sound slithering through my mind like a snake. But the labyrinth does not let go, not of those who enter its embrace. I could feel her words wrapping around me, tightening with each breath I took. I wanted to pull away, to run, but my body refused to obey. It felt as though the stone beneath my feet had grown roots, anchoring me to the floor. What is this place? I had to get out. My mind screamed for me to move, but the labyrinth wouldn't let me go. The walls felt alive now, shifting with each passing moment, as if the very air itself were part of some twisted design. The faint glow from the alcove cast eerie shadows across the room, making the walls seem to stretch and twist in unnatural angles. I am going to die here. The thought flashed through my mind, sharp and clear. But there was more. Something darker, something older than fear, began to creep in. I couldn't tell if the labyrinth was a place of death, or if it was something worse. Perhaps it was both. It wasn't just a physical space, it was an entity, a living thing, feeding off the lost souls who wandered its halls. And I had wandered too far. Why me? The words spilled out before I could stop them. It was the only question that made sense in the madness of this place. Why are you doing this? The woman smiled, a slow, agonizing smile that stretched her face in unnatural ways. Her lips cracked open, revealing teeth that weren't quite human. There was something wrong about her twisted reflection of humanity that seemed to mock me. Because you sought answers, she murmured. But there are no answers here, only the labyrinth. Her voice trailed off, and the shadows around us began to shift. The light flickered, casting strange shapes along the walls. I thought I saw something moving just outside the edge of my vision, something dark and formless. My mind raced. Was I seeing things? Or was the labyrinth alive in ways I couldn't understand? The temperature in the room dropped suddenly, and I shivered, goosebumps rising on my skin. I felt the weight of her gaze pressing down on me. And then she moved again, her hand outstretched. I could see it now, the flicker of something else in the darkness, something that seemed to bend the light itself. It was a figure, a dark silhouette standing just behind her. It was tall, impossibly tall, its outline shifting like smoke. I couldn't move, couldn't look away. My heart was hammering in my chest, each beat reverberating like a drum in the stillness of the labyrinth. Do you see it? The woman-esque voice was soft, coaxing, as if she were trying to guide me into some terrible revelation. Do you see the truth now? The figure stepped forward, closer, its form becoming clearer. It had no face, no eyes, just an empty void where its features should have been. And yet, it was there, standing in front of me, its presence swallowing all light. I wanted to scream again, but my voice was gone. Run, run, run. The word echoed in my mind, over and over, until it became a chant, a desperate plea. But no matter how hard I tried to move, my body remained frozen, as if caught in a web of invisible threads. You should never have come, the woman murmured again. Now you belong to the labyrinth. The darkness around us thickened, and I felt something cold slip around my throat. A hand? No. It was something far worse. Something that had never been human, something that existed in the space between moments. The shadows were reaching for me, tightening their grip. I forced myself to close my eyes, but the darkness only deepened, swallowing everything. The sound of my own breathing grew loud in my ears, then distorted, turning into something alien. The labyrinth had claimed me, and I was not the first. The walls around me seemed to pulse, the shadows shifting with a life of their own. The figure stood there, motionless, its presence overwhelming, like a storm that was about to break. And yet somehow I knew that this was only the beginning. It was never going to end. It started with a question. One that clung to me like a shadow. What if it has always been following me? I had always thought of myself as someone who could handle solitude, the quiet of the world when you were alone. But something had changed in the last few months. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It had turned oppressive, thick with an unknown presence. I had been walking through the park when I first noticed it, an unnerving sensation, like being watched. It was subtle at first, just a flicker of movement at the corner of my eye, a shadow shifting too quickly for me to catch. I brushed it off as nerves, the kind that came when you were alone for too long. But it didn't go away. It never did. I thought I'd escaped it, moved to the quiet house on the outskirts of town, hoping for a fresh start. But when I stepped through the door, something in the air felt different. Heavier. The house was dark, even with the sunlight streaming through the windows. The corners of every room seemed to hold something I couldn't see, but it was there, pressing in on me. I remember standing in the living room, my breath catching as I looked around. The floorboards creaked under my feet, the house settling into itself, yet it felt too quiet. It was too still, like the house was waiting for something. It has nothing, I thought, just nerves. But then, as I turned to hang my coat, I heard it soft, almost imperceptible. A rustle. A whisper. No, not a whisper, more like the faintest drag of fabric against the floor. My heart skipped a beat. I froze, my pulse loud in my ears. I told myself it was nothing, just the wind outside, or the house settling. But as I stood there, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was there with me in the room. I turned slowly, scanning the space, but there was no one. The walls, the furniture, all of it was still and empty. Still, I couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. That feeling of something lurking just beyond the edge of my vision, waiting for me to make a mistake. The shadows in the corners seemed to grow longer as the day faded. I tried to distract myself. I unpacked, set up my things, but the feeling never left. It followed me from room to room, always just out of sight, like it knew where I was going before I did. I am being paranoid, I told myself. But the whispers, the shadows, they grew louder. The house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt full of things I couldn't understand, things I didn't want to. That night, as I lay in bed, the silence was suffocating. Every little sound seemed amplified: the ticking of the clock, the creak of the floorboards below, the wind rattling the windows. But the most unsettling sound was the one I couldn't place. The one that came from within the walls, a faint scratching, like something clawing its way through the space between the rooms. Is it rats? Mice? I thought. But no. This was different. It was deliberate. It was waiting. I closed my eyes, tried to ignore it, but the scratching continued. And with it, a soft tapping, like fingers on glass. Tapping. And then nothing. Complete silence. But in that silence I felt it. A presence. A cold, suffocating presence that had slipped into the room with me. I could feel it now, right behind me. In my mind. Watching. Waiting. I turned, but there was nothing. No one. Only the shadows, stretching further as the night wore on. I tried to breathe. Tried to think rationally. But my heart was racing, and the air felt thick, as though it was pressing in on me from all sides. I could feel it now. Something had followed me. Something had found me. I wasn't alone anymore. The next morning, I woke up with the remnants of a nightmare still clinging to the edges of my thoughts. I couldn't remember the details, but I knew it was something awful. Something I couldn't outrun. I lay there for a long time, staring at the ceiling, feeling the coldness of the room seeping into my bones. The air had the stale, oppressive quality of something that hadn't been disturbed in years. The house, which I had hoped would give me peace, felt more like a trap. I tried to tell myself it was just a bad night. Everyone has them. Everyone feels uneasy sometimes. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The tapping had returned, just faint enough that I could pretend it wasn't real, but unmistakable if I listened too closely. I could hear it again as I walked down the hallway, soft and rhythmic, like fingers drumming on the wood. I stopped, mid-step, my foot hovering above the next stair. I couldn't be sure, but I felt it someone watching, just behind me, just out of sight. I spun around, heart hammering in my chest. The hallway was empty. There was nothing there. Nothing but the shadows, longer now with the light of morning creeping in through the windows. But I couldn't shake the feeling. It was always there. Always waiting. I moved quickly, trying to shake the discomfort, trying to get a grip on my thoughts. But even the mundane felt different. The way the sunlight filtered through the curtains seemed too harsh, too bright, like it was revealing things I wasn't meant to see. The house was full of small oddities. Every door that creaked open by itself. Every light that flickered when I turned my back. The sound of footsteps, faint but unmistakable, following me when I went upstairs. I told myself it was the house settling, but the more I tried to explain it away, the more I felt like the explanations were slipping away from me. I spent the next few hours in a daze cleaning, organizing, anything to keep my hands busy. But the knees never lifted. The walls felt like they were closing in. Every mirror seemed to reflect something just out of focus, just enough to make me second-guess whether what I was seeing was real. And then I heard it again. The tapping. This time, it was coming from upstairs. From the attic. I hesitated. The attic was supposed to be empty. I had checked it when I first moved in, just to be sure. There was nothing up there but dust and forgotten boxes. But the tapping. It was more insistent now. Louder. Closer. I told myself I was being paranoid. That I was letting my imagination get the best of me. But the sound was undeniable. It was like something or someone was trying to get my attention. Or maybe it was something worse, something that wanted me to find it. I grabbed the flashlight and made my way toward the stairs that led to the attic. The wooden steps creaked under my weight, each one a sharp reminder that the house was old. It had history. It had memories, but not the kind I wanted to uncover. The moment I opened the attic door, a cold gust of air hit me, the kind that raises the hairs on your neck. I stepped inside, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the darkness, searching for the source of the noise. The attic was smaller than I remembered, the low ceiling making me feel confined, trapped. And the shadows, they were thicker up here. The darkness seemed to have weight, like it was something tangible. The tapping had stopped, but the silence was worse. It was heavy, suffocating. I could feel my own breathing too loud in the stillness. As my flashlight beam swept across the room, I froze. There, in the far corner, was a figure. A shape. A shadow. It was too still. Too quiet. My heart skipped a beat. I stepped closer, my pulse thumping in my ears. The figure didn't move. It didn't speak. I swallowed hard, my hand trembling as I pointed the flashlight at it, my breath catching in my throat. It was a mannequin, or at least that is what I thought at first. But as the light flickered over it, I realized it was no mannequin at all. The shape was too lifelike, too detailed, and there was something wrong about its face. The skin was too pale, the eyes too dark, the mouth twisted into an unnatural smile. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my own feet. My throat was dry, and my vision was starting to blur with panic. What was it? How had it gotten there? I had checked this room. I knew I had. But before I could take another step, the figure's head turned, slowly, unnaturally. Its eyes locked onto mine. The room seemed to shrink, the walls pressing in. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I was frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure was gone. The attic was empty. I blinked, disoriented. I looked around, my eyes darting from corner to corner. But there was nothing. No mannequin. No figure. Just the quiet hum of the house settling. It was just my mind playing tricks on me, I told myself. But deep down, I knew better. I wasn't alone. I couldn't shake the feeling. It lingered, heavy in the air, as though the very atmosphere was thickening around me. The house, once so familiar, now felt like a maze, each corner more oppressive than the last. I wanted to leave, to run far away, but I couldn't. Something in the pit of my stomach told me that running wouldn't help. The darkness was already here inside me. The next few days blurred together. I went through the motions, eating, sleeping, working, but nothing felt real. My mind was preoccupied with the attic, with the figure. How could something so unnatural be so lifelike? How could it vanish like that, as if it had never been there at all? I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was just stress, that maybe I was working too much, or maybe it was the isolation starting to get to me. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw it, the twisted smile, the empty eyes. I couldn't escape it. Then, as if the universe was conspiring to keep me on edge, it happened again. The tapping. But this time, it wasn't coming from the attic. It was coming from inside the walls. At first, I thought it was just the house settling, like every other sound that I had convinced myself was nothing. But this was different. The tapping was rhythmic, deliberate, like a message being sent through the very bones of the house. I followed the sound, my pulse quickening with each step, until I reached the narrow hallway just outside my bedroom. The walls here were old, cracked in places. I had never thought much of it, just a natural wear of time. But now, as I pressed my ear against the cold plaster, I felt a shiver run down my spine. The tapping grew louder, closer. It was so precise, like a countdown. I backed away, instinctively, but something in me, something darker, pushed me to stay. I had to know. I had to understand. I grabbed a small hammer from the kitchen drawer, my hand shaking. There was a section of the wall near the baseboard that looked slightly loose, and I knew, somehow, that this was where the sound was coming from. I tapped it gently with the hammer. Nothing. A second tap. A third. Still nothing. Then, with a force that surprised even me, I struck it again. Harder. The wall cracked. A small section of the plaster fell away, revealing a narrow gap. My heartbeat thudded in my ears as I peered into the darkness beyond. At first, I saw nothing. Just a void. But as my eyes adjusted, I noticed something white and pale, half buried in the shadows. A piece of paper. I reached in carefully, my fingers brushing against something cold, smooth. It was a photograph, its edges yellowed with age, worn from the years. The image was faded, but I could make out a figure standing in front of a door, half obscured by shadow. Their face was hidden, but I could tell they were looking directly at the camera. It wasn't he, just the photograph that made my stomach twist. It was the name, scrawled in faded ink across the back. Eva. I froze, my mind racing. Eva. The name meant nothing to me. But why was it here? Hidden away in the walls of my house. I stood up, the photograph still clutched in my hand, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. I had to get rid of it, throw it away. This, whatever this was too much. But as I turned to leave the hallway, the temperature dropped. A chill settled in my bones, as if the very air had thickened into something suffocating. Then I heard it. A whisper. Soft at first, like a breeze, but then clear. Find me. I turned, heart racing, but saw nothing. Nothing except the same empty hallway stretching up before me. Find me. The whisper echoed in my ears, growing louder, almost demanding. I felt that something was moving behind me. My heart skipped a beat, but when I spun around, there was nothing there. I was alone, but I wasn't he. The house was alive. It was watching me, and it had plans for me. The photograph burned in my hand, its edges sharp and unforgiving. My mind was racing, spinning in 1,000 directions at once. Was this some twisted game? Was Eva someone from the house's past? Or was she the one who had been whispering to me all this time, leading me down a path I couldn't escape? My fingers trembled as I held the photograph out before me, the only clue I had to understanding the madness that was closing in. I needed to know who she was. I had to. But deep down, I knew one thing for certain. I had already started down a path from which there would be no return. The photograph felt heavier in my hand the longer I stared at it. My fingers were frozen around the edges, but I couldn't bring myself to put it down. The image of that faceless figure, the pale shadow in front of a door. I had seen something similar. I tried to think back, to remember. It was hard, the thoughts swirling around in my mind, fogging everything up. The name Eva haunted me, like a whisper that wouldn't leave my mind. Who was she? Why was she hidden in the walls of my house? I hadn't been here long, but the house felt like it was steeped in years, decades of stories left untold. I had always heard the rumors about it being haunted, about strange happenings in the neighborhood. But I dismissed them. Now I wasn't so sure. I paced around the room, holding the photograph in my hand. The house creaked beneath me, every floorboard sounding like a distant warning. The walls seemed to be closing in, their surfaces whispering secrets that I couldn't yet understand. I needed answers. I needed to know who Eva was and why her name had appeared in this house, buried deep in the walls. I walked to the small library in the corner of the house, the one I had ignored in my first days here. Shelves upon shelves of old, dusty books lined the walls, their leather covers cracked and faded. One shelf stood out to me, covered in an unsettling layer of dust. There, wedged between two books, I found an old journal, its pages yellowed with age, the leather binding worn thin. My hands trembled as I opened it, the pages rustling like whispers in a forgotten language. I could barely make out the faded handwriting, but there were names that felt wrong, as if they didn't belong. And then I found it, Eva. Her name was written in the same ink, though it was older, scrawled with urgency. Eva, the girl in the attic, the one who never left. I had to know more. I flipped through the pages faster now, desperate for any clue, anything that could explain the creeping unease that settled in my chest. There were mentions of a woman Eva who had lived in this house decades ago, before I even knew it existed. But the journal didn't say much about her. Just fragments. Half sentences that seemed to trail off as if the author had stopped writing in fear. Then there was a line that struck me cold. She watches, she never leaves, she waits in the dark. I dropped the journal. It clattered to the floor, and I recoiled, my breath caught in my throat. The whispering was louder now, more distinct. I turned, but the room was empty. Nothing had changed. Yet it felt like something was right there with me, pressing against my chest, suffocating me. The photograph burned in my hand. I stared at the walls, the cracks, the warped wood. The house was changing, or perhaps it had always been this way, hiding its secrets. I couldn't stay here much longer. The sense of being watched was overwhelming, like invisible eyes were tracking my every move. I had to leave. I had to get out. But then the thought crossed my mind, what if I left, and she followed? I couldn't escape this. No matter where I went, it would always be with me. The darkness. The fear. Eva. The whispers were becoming clearer, more demanding. Find me. I couldn't stop myself. I had to follow it. Whatever this was, this pull that was too strong to resist. With the journal and photograph clutched in my hand, I left the library and made my way to the attic. My breath was shallow, my chest tight. The door creaked as I turned the handle, its hinges groaning in protest. Inside, the attic was as cold and barren as I remembered it. But this time, it felt different. More alive. I took a hesitant step forward, the dust on the floor stirring in the faintest of movements. The dim light from the single bulb above flickered as if it, too, was unsure of what it was about to witness. And then I saw it, the door. It was the same door I had seen in the photograph. The one that stood behind Eva. The door that led, where? I could hear the tapping now, louder, sharper, coming from behind that very door. The same rhythmic beat that had echoed in the walls of the house. It was calling me. I reached out a trembling hand. The handle was cold, colder than anything I had ever felt. It felt wrong, like the metal was pulling at my very soul. But still, I turned it. The door opened with a long, drawn-out screech, revealing nothing but thick, impenetrable darkness beyond. There was no room, no hallway, just endless blackness that seemed to swallow any light that dared to enter. A gust of cold air hit me, sending a shiver down my spine. The whispers intensified, drowning out everything else. And then, through the darkness, I saw it. A figure standing still, waiting. It was her. Ethel. Her eyes were empty sockets, her face pale and distorted. She stepped forward, slowly, as if the darkness itself was dragging her along. Her movements were jerky and natural. But it was her. I knew it. "You found me," she whispered. I froze, unable to move, unable to speak. The door slammed shut behind me, trapping me in the black void. And then the whisper stopped. Everything stopped. The air was thick with something I couldn't quite describe, something that wasn't quite air, but a presence that pressed down on me. It felt as though the very darkness itself was alive, coiling around me, filling my lungs, making it harder to breathe. My chest was tight, and my heart pounded in my ears, each beat shaking my body as I stood frozen in place, staring at Eva. She was no longer just a shadow. She was here. In the flesh, or at least, what I assumed was flesh. Her skin was ashen, stretched over bones that seemed too sharp for her body. Her eyes were hollow pits, devoid of life, but they were fixed on me, unmoving, unblinking. "You found me." The words were soft, but they hung in the air like a warning, a promise. I took a step back, but the darkness behind me seemed to stretch, filling the space, making the air thicker. It was impossible to escape. There was no door now, only walls that seemed to close in, suffocating me with each passing second. My mind raced. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But the chill in the air, the weight of her gaze, it was too much. Too real. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't move. Fear had me paralyzed, rooted to the spot. Eve, if that was even her name, took another step forward, her feet dragging along the ground as though her very movements were fighting against the weight of the darkness itself. The sound of her shuffling footsteps echoed in the oppressive silence. The whispers returned, not from the walls now, but from her, from the very air around me. "You real like me now." Her voice was a ragged breath, as if she had not spoken in years. Or centuries. I tried to speak, to protest, but no words came out. All that escaped me was a strangled gasp, my breath ragged and shallow as I struggled to regain control of my body. The fear was too strong, too consuming. She was getting closer. I could hear the faint scrape of her nails on the floor as her hand reached out towards me. I could see it now, the faint tremor in her fingers, the way they curled unnaturally. It was like she wasn't fully here. Or maybe she was too much here, like she was stretching between two worlds. I reached for the journal that I had left clutched in my hand. The pages were damp with sweat, the edges soft and crumpled from my grip. I opened it again, flipping through the yellowed pages, desperate to find anything that could explain this. And then I saw it. A name. The name of the author, the one who had written the journal. Edgar West. It felt familiar, though I couldn't place why. I stared at the name for what felt like an eternity, and as I did, Eva came even closer. Her breath was cold on my skin, colder than the air, colder than anything I had ever known. She reached out with a hand, fingers twisting unnaturally, and in the dim light I could see the scars on her palms, the long, jagged cuts that seemed to bleed darkness itself. The whispers grew louder, no longer words, but an overwhelming chorus of voices, rising around me. My head was spinning, my thoughts drowning in their chaos. There was no escape. You have to join me. Her voice was louder now, commanding. The ground beneath me shook as she took one final step, standing right in front of me. Her eyes, those hollow eyes, pierced through me. There was no humanity left in them, no trace of the girl she had once been. I opened my mouth to scream, but the air was gone. The darkness had taken it all. She grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my flesh. The cold was unbearable. It wasn't just her touch. It was as if the darkness itself was seeping into my skin, invading me. I could feel it crawling beneath my bones, taking root inside of me. It was too late to turn back. Her voice echoed in my mind. It was everywhere now, in the walls, in the air, in my very thoughts. I couldn't think, couldn't breathe. I was drowning in it, in her, in this place that was no longer real or unreal, but something twisted in between. I tried to pull away, but her grip was too strong. The darkness tightened around us, closing in until the walls themselves felt like they were breathing. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the world shifted. The weight of Eva's hand was gone. The darkness that had pressed so heavily against me vanished. I gasped for air, my chest heaving as I blinked rapidly, trying to understand what had just happened. The room was empty. I was alone, but the silence felt wrong. There was no relief in it. No escape. I stumbled backward, my heart still racing. I was still trapped. Still in the same place. Only now the shadows had become deeper, darker, more insistent. I turned, desperate to find the door again, to find any way out. But nothing was the same. The walls had shifted, the angles wrong. The door I had opened to the attic was gone, replaced with another doorway, another hallway that I couldn't place. The air was heavy, thick with something that pressed down on me, making it harder to move, harder to breathe. I had been here before. I had seen this before. The photograph, the journal, even it was all connected. The house, the darkness, this place, it wasn't just something I had stumbled into. It had been waiting for me, watching me. I could hear the whispers again, faint, distant, but there. You can leave. I stumbled forward, my mind spinning. I didn't know where I was anymore. I didn't know what was real. And then, at the end of the hallway, I saw her again. Eva. But this time, her face was different. Twisted. Angrier. Her lips curled into a smile that wasn't a smile at all, a grotesque mockery of human expression. You belonged to the darkness now. I could feel her presence, like a weight that anchored me to the spot. The darkness was closing in once again. I wasn't sure where the house ended, where the world ended, and where I began. I had nowhere to go, and nowhere to hide. Oh, you made it to the end of the stories. That means it's the perfect time to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And if you haven't already, leave a like and drop a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have a great time relaxing, and good night.